Al Pacino, the resilient figure emerging from the gritty alleys of the Bronx, once harbored both deprivation and fervent aspiration within his core, ascending to become one of cinema's most revered icons. With features etched by adversity and a tone quivering like a solemn invocation, he didn't merely perform, he ignited. Each gaze was an admission, every pause a tempest, until the entire globe knelt in reverence before the individual who transformed anguish into masterpiece. From the Godfather to Scent of a Woman, he didn't construct a profession, he erected a sanctuary. Each stone positioned with fury, brilliance, and the remnants of ancient injuries. Beyond a performer, he was an inferno that defied extinction. Yet even blazes tire. Beneath each accolade, beneath each gilded trophy, resided a hush, profound, infinite, and anticipating a solitary timbre that might touch him once more. Diane Keaton, emerging under the gentle rays of California, nurtured on visions and subdued passion, reshaped the essence of flawlessness. She converted awkwardness into elegance and vulnerability into fortitude. From Annie Hall to Reds, she lent solitude a resonance and morphed authenticity into splendor. Her chuckles could saturate a chamber, but concealed within was a serenity so delicate it could shatter your spirit sans utterance. She never pursued stardom. She embodied it, demonstrating that genuineness can eclipse allure and that mildness can embody defiance. She wasn't merely a female. She was a reflector wherein the cosmos beheld its own essence mirrored via poise and valor. When their paths crossed, it transcended romance. It was a wonder. Two nomadic spirits forged from disparate blazes ventured to converge in the identical glow. He was the gale, she was the refuge. And amidst them smoldered an affection the universe misconstrued as fabrication, though it was fate inscribed in blemishes and quietude. For 2 decades, their connection persisted discreetly, veiled under renown and chronology. And presently, following her departure, the globe anticipates Al Pacino's utterance, the gentleman to whom she bestowed her vitality, to ultimately affirm what multitudes have long surmised. If you've ever surrendered your essence and vigor to an individual indelible, ignite a beacon as homage to Diane Keaton, the lady who adored with utter devotion and endured equivalent torment. Prior to the romance that would captivate the globe, exquisite, overpowering, and perpetually unresolved, there existed solely a lad who discerned prematurely that affection may depart, but famine endures eternally. What molds an icon is not solely aptitude, but the harsh origins he overcame. And for Al Pacino, that origin was sculpted in void, starvation, and the variety of agony that instructs a youth to coexist with specters. Alfredo James Pacino entered existence on April 25, 1940, to a Sicilian lineage whose ambitions surpassed their resources. When his patriarch abandoned before he could articulate, a laceration unveiled that no ovation could rectify. His matriarch, Rose, transported him to the South Bronx, where rooftops leaked frigid liquid and tempers flared more intensely than the heaters that perpetually malfunctioned. The lease was perpetually overdue. The seasons of chill perpetually extended beyond endurance. At dusk, he could perceive the adjacent dwellers quarreling through fragile barriers. Affection and wrath intertwined into identical clamor. Yet amidst that din, his mother unearthed one modest reprieve, the cinema hall. There, beneath wavering illumination and the aroma of buttered kernels and moist fleece, the silhouettes on the canvas were more compassionate than those awaiting domestically. In that obscurity, a vulnerable youth comprehended that narratives could transmute isolation into dialect. That visages 40 feet lofty could educate him on emotion when existence encircling him seemed excessively rigid to tolerate. But the Bronx was no haven, it was a forge. By a decade old, he confronted suffering directly. A tumble against a metallic barrier that ripped through his epidermis and left him weeping into the breeze. His tiny palms clutching alloy slippery with crimson, murmuring supplications that dissipated into the chill. The mark mended, but the impotence lingered. As he matured, famine gnawed like an auxiliary pulse. Certain evenings, supper was a fragment of loaf immersed in diluted dairy, and he would masticate leisurely to prolong it. His mother would grin and claim she lacked appetite, though he observed the quiver in her digits. The Bronx frost could penetrate partitions. He'd awaken to ice flourishing on the interior pane, delineate it with his fingertip, and feign it was creation. By 13, he was Sonny, a moniker uttered with fondness and caution alike. A fidgety youth pursuing warmth in a realm constructed from frost. Tobacco and inexpensive ale provided evasion, but each gulp savored like remorse. By 15, insurgency supplanted guidance. He evaded lectures, banged portals, and confused resistance with liberty. Without performance, he would subsequently avow, "I might not have escaped." And even then, he already recognized how slender the barrier was between endurance and capitulation. At 17, after one final clash with Rose, he departed academia and directly into the voracity of the avenues. He transported provisions for unknowns, cleansed windshields for currency, and slumbered beneath casements that seeped the radiance of others' existences. Evenings merged into dawns, and quietude became his sole companion. Three of his nearest comrades, youths who once partook in his mirth, his deprivation, his lone smokes, succumbed to dependency before 20. Their burials were modest, their void immense. Pacino bore them like phantoms woven into his thorax, mementos that it could effortlessly have been him. Narcotics, spirits. "I likely would have perished if I hadn't discovered performance," he once murmured, not as admission, but as testament to perseverance. Performance didn't render him renowned. It preserved his vitality. Every frigid evening, every vessel, every contusion became a practice for the figure he would evolve into. The Bronx had imparted cruelty, indeed, but it also bestowed veracity. And that veracity became his armament. The daunting quietude of Michael Corleone, the injured bellow of Frank Slade, the spectral elegance that rendered torment appear divine. To perceive Al Pacino solely as the myth is to overlook the youth he formerly was. The youth who transmuted famine into potency, forfeiture into propellant, revolt into craftsmanship. The lanes granted him marks, but they also endowed his essence. And from that essence, hammered in frost and blaze, he constructed the conflagration the globe still senses today. If Al Pacino's adolescence was hewn from deprivation and perseverance, Diane Keaton's was fashioned by quietude. A quietude so mild it nearly concealed the pang beneath. While his realm was saturated with commotion, hers was erected on moderation. And yet both matured absorbing the identical ruthless doctrine that affection in its absence can contour a lifetime eternally. It's poignant to contemplate that a female who bestowed the cosmos such radiance commenced her existence in such subdued grief. Born on January 5, 1946, beneath the tender luminance of Los Angeles heavens, she matured in Hollywood's umbra, a metropolis fixated on impeccability, where sentiment was a frailty to be concealed. Her patriarch, Jack Hall, a respectable gentleman of subdued dignity, constructed spans and confines in equivalent proportion. Her matriarch, Dorothy Diane Keaton Hall, once adorned as Mrs. Los Angeles 1955, bore the luminescence of an aspiration she was never permitted to inhabit. The acclaim she yearned for was supplanted by the drone of household duties, the platform illuminations by the ochre glimmer of the culinary lantern. Within their orderly abode, all appeared impeccable. For offspring aligned at supper, grins rehearsed, sentiments unvoiced. But beneath the veneer of ordinariness, Quietude compressed against the barriers until even affection resonated like constraint. I matured in a kin that eschewed discourse on emotions. Diane would subsequently divulge. We merely existed within them. Those utterances were not lament. They were a dissection of the core. As a youngster, she observed her mother's radiance diminish daily, not in catastrophe, but in reiteration. Dorothy's existence became a gradual asphyxiation. Utensils, timetables, courteous chuckles masking the throb of a vision postponed. At 9, Diane positioned in the culinary threshold, observing her mother desiccate her palms and grin at void. My mother's existence was an admonition, not a blueprint. She would subsequently inscribe in her autobiography, then again. That epiphany did not toughen her, it kindled her. While other lasses practiced their destinies as spouses, Diane practiced her liberation. Her uprising wasn't boisterous, it was steadfast. Educators labeled her disobedient. Peers murmured peculiar. But she was already forging an identity from opposition, instructing herself that tranquility can be shield and disparity can be fate. I discerned early that if none heeds you, she once articulated, you must become the reverberation yourself. Her deliverance arrived in secondary education under the quivering radiance of a leased platform. She portrayed Blanche Du Bois, her timbre quaking but vibrant. And for the initial occasion, she felt observed. That evening, she stated subsequently, the quietude finally fractured. Performance wasn't evasion, it was purification. By 20, she bundled her existence into one diminutive valise and abandoned California posteriorly. 2 garments, a ledger, a designation she would soon render eternal. She discarded Hall and adopted her mother's natal surname, Keaton, an insurgency enveloped in devotion. Every instance they utter Miss Keaton, they're invoking my mother's designation, she murmured once as though still endeavoring to revive her. Matriarch via craftsmanship. In New York, she pursued at the neighborhood playhouse, traversing miles between trials and economical leased chambers, subsisting on Java, conviction, and obstinate elegance. The diminutive lass who once submerged in quietude became the female who instructed the cosmos to attend. She transmuted her mother's overlooked visions into edifices of veracity. And through her timbre, wavering, audacious, fearless, she granted era's license to sense, to articulate, and to be perceived. While Diane Keaton was discerning to convert quietude into potency, someplace across the nation, another essence was accomplishing the identical with Inferno. If her uprising was subdued, his was thunderclap, and from the debris of his boyhood ascended a blaze that defied demise. The blaze that would one day illuminate Hollywood. He had already traversed the inferno of a tumultuous youth. But perseverance alone was never sufficient. What sustained Al Pacino respiring was a vision that ridiculed his destitution. The conviction that a lad from the South Bronx with vacant pockets and frost-nipped digits could transmute torment into craftsmanship. Performance wasn't a fantasy, it was vital air. And for that inhalation, he exchanged slumber for toil, warmth for tenacity, dignity for the opportunity to pertain. Days fused into drudgery, serving platters until his fingers cleaved, conveying correspondence through snowfall so dense it saturated his footwear, scouring surfaces until bleach irritated his respiratory organs. His palms were perpetually chilled, his repasts frequently ethereal. At dusk, when the undergrounds lapsed into hush, he'd infiltrate obscured cinema halls, nestling in the rear tier beneath the shimmer of overlooked reels. The buzz of the apparatus was cradle song, the dispersed kernels his cushion. When attendants discovered him at Aurora, he'd feign he'd merely arrived prematurely for the initial exhibition. Sometimes when the hall was occupied, the thoroughfare became his berth. Pavement nipping through his overcoat, rodents darting near enough to remind him he persisted. Yet even then, capitulation felt more frigid than the wintry gust. By dawn, he would ascend, hollow-gazed, shuddering, but unfractured, and traversed miles to HB Studio. There, Charles Laughton conveyed something no one previously had, that the turmoil within him could be molded into significance. Subsequently, at the actor's studio, under Lee Strasberg's vigilant gaze, he unearthed that agony could be militarized. Isolation could be alchemized into authenticity. Without performance, he murmured years subsequently, I might not have endured whatsoever. Those were evenings of deprivation succeeded by mornings of optimism, a cadence that blistered his physique but polished his essence. At 22, the lad who once slumbered in dim halls was now declaiming Shakespeare by daylight. Emaciated, fervent, inexorable, companions recounted how he evaporated into practices, rehearsing until his knuckles hemorrhaged against the platform timber, pursuing veracity like vital air. Every denial, and there were multitudes, propelled him deeper into fixation, sculpting craftsmanship from fatigue. Then Thunderbolt struck. 1968, The Indian Wants the Bronx. The drama could have been obliterated like myriad others, but his rendition ignited the space. Reviewers inscribed his designation as if it had awaited revelation. The Obie Award ensued, not a memento, but evidence that the unseen lad from the Bronx had ultimately been perceived. He didn't beam that evening. He merely murmured to a comrade, perhaps I'll consume tomorrow. Destiny, enduring as ever, lingered in the peripheries in the guise of Martin Bregman, the gentleman who perceived not a novice, but a cyclone confined in mortal epidermis. Collectively, they initiated the ascent. In 1969, Pacino assaulted Broadway with Does It Tiger Wear a Necktie? And departed the platform drenched in ovation. The Tony Award coronated him, but what signified more was the harmony. The lad who once implored warmth from a hall's radiance now stood illuminated by it. For the initial occasion, he trusted the vision was tangible. Those were the Forge years. Not yet the Godfather. Not yet the eternal Michael Corleone, but the cauldron where discipline encountered desperation. See you in the next video.